that for decades this ruling class has been able to operate from the shadows and have Labour parties, Tory parties in England, the Social Democrats, the Conservatives in Germany. They've been able to have the Republicans and Democrats in this country and basically own both parties. And so the parties do fight over who's in control, but they're still beholden to the same interest. It's kind of like a Don King fight where both boxers, both heavyweight boxers, are owned by King, so it doesn't matter who really wins at the end because it's all rigged and because Don King wins either way you slice it. Or famous horse races where you learn the mafia basically owned or controlled all the horses. Once you understand that and once you begin to identify the actual establishment and what their agenda is, then there's no way they can get their agenda completed if you're aware of that, because it's so authoritarian, so dictatorial, unelected, tyrannical, oppressive, arrogant, abusive. This is the first issue that people have to understand, and then we can have a debate about what type of world we want to build as individual humans. But what we watch on television, the dramas, the sitcoms, the movies, the sports icons, the type of media that we are sold has been dumbed down by design, has been made vapid and shallow and stupid so that the general public is focused on issues that are mindless, and it creates a feedback loop where the public starts getting dumbed down, then the media gets even more dumbed down, and then both just feed off of each other until you see the test scores dropping, you see the creativity imploding, you see the amount of inventiveness and individualism being eradicated, and we're all losing our cultures. We're all losing what our forebears passed down to us. We're all losing that true grit, that individualism, and it's being replaced by a type of global corporate Borg that is completely shallow. And so when we come back, I'm going to briefly talk about LeBron James and the World Cup, because on Thursday I shot a 5.5-minute video that the Drudge Report linked to on Friday, that a lot of other newspapers I noticed over the weekend actually reported on, and they were positive. They said Mr. Jones really hits the nail on the head and has pointed out that our society is in decline. We are collapsing. And this is a ridiculous spectacle in Ohio with the governor and these mayors and everybody worshiping and begging LeBron James to stay there. And then he totally pimped him and just left. Because Florida has no income tax, state income tax mainly. But it just illustrates how their priorities are completely screwed up. They won't go out and demonstrate or protest or go to the State House or go to a Tea Party event for liberty and freedom in their children's future, but they will go out and have mass protests for months begging for LeBron James. Okay, let me finish up with the sports and Hollywood television distractions, fashion, all of it. And then I'm going to get into the news, because first we'll talk about the distraction itself, what it's distracting us from, the serious issues that are happening. I've read propaganda by the father of modern advertising and propaganda, Edward Bernays, written more than 80 years ago. I have read the writings of Joseph Goebbels. I have studied the rise and decline of the Roman Empire by Gibbon. And the Romans knew over 2,000 years ago to use sports and gladiatorial diversions and horse races as a distraction. And whenever the economy in Rome was having a problem, or whenever people were starving, the imperial government would just fund more sports, more fairs, more distractions. I mean, it's very elementary. They knew thousands of years ago. And that's the issue. I'm not here saying you're lazy, you're stupid, you're bad. You need to be focused on things that Alex Jones thinks is important. I'm trying to explain to you that the establishment is on record. I mean, I remember reading Edward Bernays, stuff he wrote in the 20s. This was a advisor to the Department of War, before it was the Department of Defense. This is the guy, this is the reason you eat bacon and eggs. They couldn't get rid of pork bellies. They couldn't get rid of bacon. It was a product that really nobody wanted. It was only used for flavoring and cooking. And so he ran ads nationwide as part of a PR operation to say, you've got to have bacon with your eggs. And I'm just giving you an example of how they engineer everything. That was a PR stunt. They wanted to get women smoking cigarettes back in the 20s. Women saw it as uncouth and dirty and bad to smoke. And the cigarette makers wanted another 50% of the market open to them. And so, and Bernays wrote about this in Bragg, so he was hired, and they would pay the feminist movement, the flappers, they would pay the suffrage movement to smoke cigarettes in the front lines of their marches and to say that was an act of rebellion. But the leaders were being paid to do this. And because women saw it then as rebellious, they all went out and bought cigarettes and got lung cancer 40 years later, basically. And again, another example of manipulation. And you fast forward to 2010, they don't even deny that tens of billions of dollars are spent by the federal government every year now buying messages in ads on television and radio. Not just overt messages, but covert messages in other ads. Or that they pay sometimes tens of millions per season to top sitcoms and dramas and cop shows to have messages. I mean, when you see a show and the cop's beating somebody up going, "You darn gun owners, you're causing problems," or almost every show out there, homeschooling families or pedophiles or criminals. That's not true, but the government is paying to put that message out. I mean, how creepy is that? How creepy is it that they pay for these anti-liberty, anti-freedom messages to program you? And that's my point, is that humans model after what they see as heroes, what they idolize. And the psychologists understand this. And this country had 4% of the world's population and half the world's wealth by 1950, conservatively. 4% of the world's population, half the wealth. We had almost all of the world's most important patents. We had the most creative, most inventive, most individualistic population on Earth. That's why we were so great. And now, look at this Newsweek headline today. The creativity crisis. For the first time, research shows that American creativity is declining. What went wrong, and how do we fix it? And it goes over the statistics. And you've heard the statistics. You've heard the different polls they've done, where in some cases over 80% of high school seniors can't name the vice president. Over half of Americans, different studies I've seen, can't name their state capital or who their state representative is, or they can't even tell you who the first president was or who the second president was. They can't tell you the three branches of government. They can't tell you what the First Amendment is, what the Fourth Amendment is. And so if people don't know what their liberties and freedoms are, if people don't know what their history is, how can they ever have any expectation of the next generation having it better than the last? And with all of this decadence, with all of this focus on pettiness, we see society falling apart. In Nazi Germany, they were obsessed with sports, obsessed with their Hollywood. The same thing in Rome, the same thing in any society that's declining. The country with the second highest rate of television watching is Greece. The U.S. is number one. Look how Greece has been overtaken by these private bankers. And it's not just Alex Jones making this observation. When you actually read the Council on Foreign Relations bragging about this, when you read Edward Bernays bragging about this, when you read about Goebbels talking about using film to control the German people and to program them, it's amazing. So all of this is going on around us. And the United States in the 1950s, when we hit our peak, had the highest test scores in the world, better than Germany, better than England, better than France, who were right behind us, better than the Netherlands. Now we have the lowest test scores, not just of the industrialized world, but we are, last time I checked, number 40-something. It's always changing and getting worse each year, but a few years ago I saw the number. We were in the mid-40s. So there's 20-something industrialized countries. We were behind 20-plus additional third-world countries that were under the industrialized world, or the first world, the West. The United States is a joke. I mean, I look at many adults and I hear them in shops or at the mall or at a restaurant. They don't even have language. I saw a study just a few months ago where the language in the United States and England is being restricted, is being reduced. People are using a lot less words than they were. Their vocabularies are much smaller to where you can't even communicate. Many people listening right now can't even understand what I'm talking about. And, I see them commenting on my YouTube videos going, listen to this guy. He be using fancy language. No, I'm not using fancy language. Have you read a newspaper from the 1770s, 1780s, 1820, 1830s? I have. I've bought many books that are compendiums of just newsprint of the time. And I can't understand it. I am a moron compared to somebody in 1800 reading the newspaper. I have to get an encyclopedia out just to understand these people. And they weren't using complex words and verbal prose, written prose to show off. This was the language. They were into inventors. The rock stars of that age that made this country so great were inventors. They were astronomers. They were scientists. They were trailblazers. They were explorers. And they were people like firemen also who would go into a burning building to save children. That's who they built up. Sports, just 60, 70 years ago, was something for children. And you would go watch your children play, and it was for their own health and to teach them aggressiveness and team spirit. Sports were always promoted through warlike societies, even going back to Greece, of course, with their Olympics, to develop more stamina for war. And so we had the Boy Scouts to teach boys how to camp, how to keep their packs together, how to be able to be self-sufficient in the wild for war. That was the admitted statement.